Hi and welcome to a new video with me, Higlights. It was a while ago that I recorded a video, but now it's time again, and I plan to do it more often than I have done the last half a year. Today I will talk about my new open source library called TinyEndpoints. Of course it had to be named something with Tiny because I have other libraries called Tiny, like TinyIndpoints and TinyMVM. I have a long history of naming libraries tiny, and that's often because they are pretty small, solving a small specific task. With Tiny Endpoints, I want to solve a problem that I had when working with minimal APIs in a bigger project, and that was that it became a bit messy. All the endpoints was placed in the program file, and even if most of them just was one row of code, it soon get hard to find the correct endpoints. You had to search for it. Yeah, it was not good. And I don't want it to go back to controllers either. So I started to work and think, and yeah, maybe it would be great to have some attributes that I can decorate a method with, like a get, and it will create an endpoint from that and run the app.mapGet that you use with minimal APIs. So I started to think even more. I wrote some code and I used reflection for finding the attributes, and that worked pretty good. Then I started thinking a bit more. I showed it for my friend and fellow MVP Jimmy Engström, and he said, yeah, you have just reinvented controllers. I say, what? Yeah, you're right. I've reinvented controllers, but in different ways. The good thing with minimal APIs, except that they are easy to get started with, is that they're using no reflection. And to use reflection and then registered API endpoints like in minimal API, it's more or less controllers, just in another form. All the good things with minimal APIs are gone. So I decided I cannot do like that. And then I start thinking, are there other ways to find those attributes in the code instead of running reflection on startup? Because having code scanning assemblies in startup is not that good, I think. I think it was Jimmy that asked me, why are you not using source generators for this? Yeah, I started thinking source generators. Yeah, that sounds about perfect. The problem is that I am not that good about writing source generators. So, what to do then? I start reading some documentation, of course, but I also have my friend right next to me in Visual Studio called Copilot. And what I realized is that Copilots are very good about creating source generators. So I just wrote in the chat, I want this blah 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 to generate a method and being like that. Okay. And pressed enter and I wait a bit. And then I already had a project to test this. So I'd run it. It worked. I modified the code a bit to make it better. And then I iterate that with post, get, put, and so on. And now I think I have a pretty good library. And today I will show you that. And of course I made the library open source, and you will find all the code on my GitHub. And here you have it called TinyEndpoints, and you find actual code, you find tests, you find sample projects here. So the first thing you need to do when using TinyEndpoints is to install the NuGet package called TinyEndpoints, and then you create a new partial class of program, and you add this generate endpoints attribute to it. And I will show you all of this in Visual Studio 2, but I just walk through fast about what the project can do. And when you add that attribute, it will generate a method in the partial program that you can call from the main program. And that is register generate endpoints, just like that. And that makes it possible to create separate class. It doesn't matter on what namespace you have in the class. And then you can have this, like this get user, for example. Add the get attribute from TinyEndpoints namespace to that method, and it will create an endpoint for you, and it will use the app.mapGet, for example, that you write in program if you're using minimal APIs as in the examples. And it support dependency injection. You can use attributes like from header, from query, from body, and so on. You can pass parameters like this, exactly as you do with minimal API, so nothing is special there. So you can of course use post, you can use put, and you can use delete. And with the minimal APIs, you probably sometimes use with minimal APIs, you probably sometimes use the fluent way of configure an endpoint, like after app.mapGet, you use like with the name, allow anonymous, and so on. With the TinyEndpoints, you cannot directly do that, but you can create endpoint configurators. So the only thing you need to do when you're creating an configurator is to use the iEndpoint configurator interface. Just like this, for example, I created an auth configurator, and the iEndpoint configurator interface has this method configure that you need to implement. And that method takes the route handler builder as a parameter. And route handler builder is what returned if you call app.mapGet, for example. And that makes it possible to use all the method that you can use there in the fluent style, like require authorization, for example. You just do like this builder.require authentication, then you can continue with tags, with name, and so on. So that is simply how it works. Here you see an example also how you use the configurator. You set it like this post and get, and the other attributes have a generic variant as well. You can also do like this if you want to set configure type, but I prefer the generic way. So let's dive into Visual Studio, and I will show you this in a fresh project that I recently created. This is just a project created from the template. So let's start to add the NuGet package. So now in the NuGet package manager, we just write tiny endpoints and make sure that include pre-releases is checked, because this is just a pre-release right now. And then we install it. So now when the NuGet package is installed, we will go and create a partial of the program. So a new class. So we can remove the namespace declaration, so it will be the same as in the other program. And we add partial keyword. And now we can add the generate endpoints attribute from the TinyEndpoints namespace. So TinyEndpoints dot generate endpoint. And now it's possible to call the register generate endpoints from the program, from the first program class. So now here after the sample registration of the minimal APIs, so we call the register generated endpoints and pass app to it. And that method is generated in another partial of program. And you can see that if you go to dependencies, analyzers, TinyEndpoint generators, then expand all this, and then we have it here. And you can see how this looks. So now we can go and create some endpoints. So we create a new class, user endpoints, for example. Create a new method. We can call it get user, returns iResult. Can also be a task of iResult if we want that. So get user, string ID. Yeah, it can return like that. That's okay. The Copilot suggestion. So, of course, we need to add a name there, like that, and we say ID, like that. So now, if we want to make this an endpoint, we go and add an attribute, like get. We specify a route, like users slash ID, like that, and that will map this as a parameter to the method. So to verify that this works, we can go back here to dependencies, source generators, and we can take a look here. Now we can see that we have this map get users ID, and it will call the get user method of user endpoints. Now we have a reference here to this instance of the object. If we don't want that, we can go back here and we can make this method static instead. And now we will not have that instance of the object here. And I think that is a better way, but that is up to you how you want to have it. So if we go back here, we can also create a configurator for this endpoint. And this is if you want endpoint specific configurations. Otherwise, I think you should set up all like this in program. So we create a new class, public class user configurator. And as I said before, we need to use the endpoint configurator interface, but we should not do like Copilot suggest here because that's wrong. So just say endpoint configurator, and we instead use implement interface. And now we can see we have the configure method and we have the route handler builder. And route handler builders is also what app.mapGet returns. So that means that we can use the same fluent syntax here as we do on the app.mapGet. So like builder.accept.add endpoint filter and so on. We can build up our configuration here. Hello anonymous, for example. So, and now to add that to the endpoint, you will use the generic variant of get. So you just say user configurator, just like that. And now it will be possible to use this with anonymous. So let's open the sample project from GitHub to show you some more scenarios. So here we have this product endpoints. Here I have placed all the product endpoints inside of the same class. You don't have to do that. You can have one endpoint per class or file. You can have all product endpoints here, and you can have a one-liner calling a product service, for example. It's up to you how you want to do it. But I have done it like this in this example. So here you can see I have the get methods. I have a post method. I have a post method with a configurator. This is an authenticate configurator, for example. In this case, I allow anonymous for all API endpoints that don't have this authenticate configurator added to it. We can see here I can use both post and put on the same method. It will register this method as both a post and a put. And you can use from header, exactly as you can do with minimal APIs. You can use dependency injection. You can use request objects that's serializing from the body. Yeah, you can, everything inside of here is exactly the same as on minimal APIs. So what do you think about this? If you have feedback, if you find problem, create an issue on GitHub. Tell me what's wrong, what can I improve? Add suggestions or write a comment here on YouTube. What do you think about this? Is this something you will think about using in your future project? Or is it just a stupid idea to have this? Tell me. And if you like this video, please press the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you like it really much and want to support the channel to make it possible for me to create videos more often, you can also use the super thanks button. And thank you very much for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.